As a young man, he was working on trading vessels, and by the time he was 18 years old, he had probably visited most of the major ports in the world. Because of that travel, he spent 3 years in the American Navy, saw some service just after the Mexican War, and was discharged, and then in 1852 enlisted in the British Navy in Liverpool, England. And, it's not so surprising, perhaps, that while William Hall was a man of color, man of Nova Scotia, African descent, he also was a man who was born into a time when the British government had created opportunities for people of African descent to serve in some of their institutions, and the military was one of those. So in 1852, he enlisted in the Royal Navy in Liverpool, England, and his first service was as an able seaman. He saw service on a number of ships and, in fact, saw considerable service in the Crimean War, where he won several medals for bravery and for the service that he spent there. In 1857, William Hall was serving in the Far East on the HMS ship, Her Majesty's ship Shannon, when at a time when the Indian regiments mutinied or became rebellious. And I think, this William Hall became certainly both a hero of history, but also a man who was caught up in his time. The British government at that point was involved in running an empire that spanned the globe. William Hall was a relatively lowly military man in the British military, and he got caught up in this rebellion in India. And his ship, among other crews, was called to give service to to government regiments that were trying to quell the rebellion. And in November 1857, the crew of HMS Shannon was sent to rescue the British garrison, which was under siege in Lucknow, India. And what happened thereafter was what got William Hall the Victoria Cross, why he's now referred to as VC. The mutinous Indian regiments had secured themselves within a mosque. And the mosque was under siege at the point that Hall and other members of his crew arrived. And they tried to take the mosque, but suffered very heavy casualties. Many of his crew were killed. And William Hall and members of his other crew, including the lieutenant who was in charge, his name was James Young, were assigned to use cannon to break a hole in the thick wall of the mosque. And they began to do that. As I said, many of the members of the gun crews were killed as that activity was happening. But Hall, who was a large and powerful man, continued to fire, continued to reload, continued to move forward, despite all of the carnage that was happening around him. Lieutenant Hall was seriously wounded in this event, but Lieutenant Young, was seriously wounded, but Hall continued forward. And eventually they were able to breach the wall, and the army behind them was able to move into the mosque and take control of the situation. And as a result of that event, the captain of the MCS Shannon, William Peel, recommended William Hall and Thomas and Lieutenant Young for the Victoria Cross in recognition of their valiant behavior. And I'd just like to read to you what the citation said at that point from part of the historical record. Lieutenant, now Commander Young, late gunnery officer of Her Majesty's ship Shannon, and William Hall, captain of the foretop of that vessel, were recommended by the late Captain Peel for the Victoria Cross for their gallant conduct at a 24-pounder gun brought up to the angle of the mosque at Lucknow on the 16th of November, 1857. And the Victoria Cross, for those of you who haven't looked at one recently, is in the shape of a Maltese cross. It has a lion emblazoned on it, standing on the crown of Britain, and underneath that are the words "for valor." And Mr. Hall, in later years, as he wore that cross very proudly, always displayed it on a blue ribbon to suggest and show that he had been a member of the Royal Navy. Mr. Hall was actually awarded the Victoria Cross on October 28, 1859, on board the HMS Donegal in Queenstown Harbour, Ireland, which was more than 3 years after the event which earned him that. He continued to actually serve in the Royal Navy until 1876, when he retired as a quartermaster and was given a certificate of good conduct at that time. And then, like people often do when they retire from the military or from some other career and they start off life in Nova Scotia, he returned to Hortonville, where he started off life, and moved in with two of his sisters on a farm in that community near Avonport. And he lived a relatively peaceful life during that time. He farmed. There are some reports that he had what looked to be a prosperous farm, that he lived fairly well in that environment. And in 1901, a few years before, just 3 years, in fact, before his death, he was in Halifax when the Duke of Edinburgh and York, who was later King George V, visited Nova Scotia, and was recognized by the Duke because he was wearing his medals, and was actually given a place of honor in the parade during that event. One of I think the few times after his discharge that he was recognized for service. William Hall actually died at home of what was called paralysis on August 25th, the day of my mother's death, actually, in 1904. He was buried without military honors, tragically, in an unmarked grave. And he was in debt. He owed, despite what appeared to be a farm that gave him a reasonable living, he and his sisters were in debt for £500 sterling. And friends of his estate actually were asked to see if they could sell his medals to actually raise funds to pay off his debt, and that happened. And so the medals found their way back to England during that time. Since then, a number of things have happened. I mentioned already that during the Crimean War, he was awarded other medals. He wore those as proudly as his Victoria Cross. He was the third Canadian, actually, to win the Victoria Cross, and the first African Canadian to win it. The first two, actually, were Colonel Alexander Dunn from Toronto for service in the Crimean War, and Surgeon Herbert T. Reed, who also during the Indian Mutiny in 1857 was awarded the Victoria Cross. But Hall was the first Canadian winner of the Naval Victoria Cross. About 80 people have won that award for valor since that time. Since Hall's death, there have been a number of people. I only have 1 minute left, so I would like to move very quickly to not tell you so many more things, but to say that William Hall's life, I think, has been an inspiration to many people. I was in Gibson Woods not very long ago with the Minister for African Nova Scotian Affairs, and sat with a few people who are elders of that community, who were talking about the resurgence of pride that they have in the place that they live. And in front of the church in that community is a plaque created by the Valley African Nova Scotia Development Association, which pictures some of the historical figures who have been important to that community and to the Gibson Woods community. And William Hall is part of that group. So people look to William Hall as somebody, a hero, as somebody to revere, and as somebody who can give hope for a better world in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will now recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with great pleasure I rise to say a few words on the hero, and we can only say one word, hero, William Hall. Unfortunately, like so many other things in the black community, his heroism went unrecognized here in Nova Scotia for a long time. And my honourable colleague very aptly described the heroism and the battles he was in and the many awards and medals he did receive, which really shows the value of such a brave and wonderful sailor. And indeed, being the first Canadian in the Navy to receive the Victoria Cross is quite an accomplishment. When you look back at history and all the battles that have been fought, all the things that the Canadian forces had been involved in at that time and prior to that time, it was really an incredible feat, especially for a black man who at that time would have been treated basically as a slave and been able to accomplish the things he did, and indeed conquered not only fear of a battle and the many things that would go along with that, but also the problems that it would have had at that time being from the black community. I want to go on and thank the Black Cultural Centre and one person in particular, Dr. Henry Bishop. Dr. Henry Bishop was instrumental this year in getting a Canadian stamp in honor of William Hall, Victoria Cross recipient. And there was a wonderful ceremony at the Black Cultural Centre, which the Admiral for Standing Forces Atlantic was there, along with Canada Post and many other dignitaries, and indeed bestowed upon this gentleman, posthumously of course, one of the greatest honors you can ever have in this country, a stamp that would recognize the wonderful and indeed the courageous work that he did when he was in the Navy. And you move forward in history from William Hall, and you see the Black Construction Platoon that indeed, we talked about this in the legislature the other day, that when they entered the war, the Second World War, that they didn't think they could hold up their end in a battle, and they were afraid that they couldn't do the job. And they didn't remember William Hall and all the other people like him that had fought so gallantly. And indeed, over the time that this has been gone on for years and years and years, and my honourable colleague talked about the pride in the black community now, which is coming back, which I'm very pleased to see, representing the largest black community, Indigenous community actually in Canada, I believe, that the pride is coming back in the community. To find things that have been done are starting to be recognized. So many people that had been first in the country, as first and sometimes in North America, and accomplishing things, and at the time they accomplished them, there was no recognition. And indeed, that I hope will change forever, and I'm sure that it's on the way to do that. And you see the work that's been done by the black community and by people such as William Hall to make this country as great as it is, and with almost no recognition. Can you imagine a hero to the level that William Hall had achieved in his lifetime in the military, and indeed was buried without any military honors? That's unacceptable, totally unacceptable. And today, that would not happen. And it's nice to see today that people are working together in the forces, our Canadian forces, which we're all very proud of in this, I know in this legislature, to see that it doesn't matter what your color is or what your ethnic background is, you can accomplish anything you desire to accomplish in the forces as long as you work hard like everybody else does. And that is long, long overdue. I can remember that the Black Construction Platoon, I was talking to Dr. Henry Bishop, one of the organizers of that function in Pictou every year, and he said, you know, the highest ranking officer that we've ever been able to attract to this function, this very function to honor all these members in this construction platoon who achieved wonderful things and indeed did receive many medals but never got recognition beyond that, was the lieutenant commander, the highest ranking person ever. Fortunately, I had a cousin, a woman, at that time was a brigadier general in the Canadian military. And I approached her and asked her if she would come to the Black Construction Platoon's annual celebration that they had in Pictou. And she said, well, I have to check my schedule and everything else. And we made the arrangements, and she did come. Was the highest ranking officer that ever been to this function. Now, this is today. This is not 200 years ago. This is today. So lo and behold, we got there, and she came. She gave a wonderful speech, and it so happened that she, under her watch, in the military, she did document her organization that she was responsible for did document and publish many books on the contributions by the black people in the military over the years. So she was very familiar with this. And lo and behold, I was much to my surprise and her surprise, because she made quite some big waves in the Canadian military when she did come, that the Brigadier General who outranked her here in Atlantic Canada showed up with his staff at this function. So it was good to see that finally, the fine work and the hard work and the bravery and the heroism that the soldiers with a African Nova Scotian background and an African Canadian background really started to see some people in authority in the military that indeed recognized how important their contributions were. And I think that I was very fortunate to be able to convince my cousin to come and participate in that function. And indeed, she did enjoy it very much and got to meet many people that I'm sure she'll remember till the day she passes away, which I hope is a long time from now. But it's been an incredible experience for me working in the black community. And when you see, I didn't know anything about William Hall, and I went to school with a lot of the young people from Preston when I went to school, and I'm sure they didn't know about him. And it's important that the community knows about people like William Hall and so many more. The list is so large and the accomplishments are so great, it would take days and days to go through all the things that the black community has accomplished in Nova Scotia, particularly in Nova Scotia. And when you see the things that have happened and the things we can no longer tolerate and shouldn't have been tolerated years ago, it's nice to see that slowly things are changing. You're seeing that a lot of people from the community are now in the process of going to university. When I went to school, very few people from the black community went to university. And it was unfortunate, very unfortunate. And I talked in this place before about the mid-70s when the black community, the children from the black community weren't allowed to go to school. They were not allowed to go to school in the 1970s. And they would come out and they'd ask the children and what an escalator was. Now, fortunately, I traveled to the U.S. on vacation to see relatives down there. I knew what an escalator was. But they would ask me what an escalator was before I went to school. I couldn't have told them because there was none here. So if they couldn't answer a couple of questions like that, well, you're mentally challenged and you can't go to school. That's exactly what school board used to tell them. So finally, the black community had enough of this, and they took the school board and the province to court, and indeed started the process of ensuring that the black children in the community get an equal education. So, and then as they went through this process, they decided they were going to give the kids a head start, and they started a daycare center. Well, the daycare center first, they went to the Department of Education and said, what do we need to teach our kids to get them ready for school when they go into primary? Well, we're not interested. Then after 3 or 4 years of running the daycare, the school came out and said, what are you doing to the kids? He said, they're coming to school and they're way ahead of any of the other kids. You've trained them so well. So you can see what the community that's determined can do, and I can only commend the community for the fantastic work they've done and look forward to many more positive things as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's indeed an honour tonight to get up and say a few words, and I want to thank the member for Kings North and the member for Preston as well for their comments this evening. And this is a lot about a couple of history lessons we've heard so far, so I'm going to talk just a little bit different. No sense in repeating, things that have already been said. If I can help it, I'm going to stay away from that. But I'm going to talk about William Hall a little bit. He comes from my area, Hantsport area, and I know he spent some time in the Kings North, I guess in those days, which wasn't defined as of yet, but would have been what is Kings North today, and then moved on and has certainly spent time in the Hantsport area after his multiple journeys around the world and all of his escapades and fighting wars and all of the great things that he had done and certainly achieved, and very much well deserving of the award that was bestowed upon him, Victoria Cross. And there have been a number of tributes. We see a tribute downstairs in this very building this historic building. There's a photo, a painting hanging on the wall down there, very appropriately. That was done some time ago. We've heard about a stamp that's been done, and a little bit about the history of the wars that he fought in, and so on. But besides that, here he lieth in Hantsport, of all places around the world, in his journey that he was taken in the small town of Hantsport, Nova Scotia. And there as well is a monument erected with a plaque on it that talks a little bit about William Hall, and for many, many years gone unrecognized, and then rightfully given the place and buried appropriately and given the honors that he so deserved. In this province, strangely enough, we have 5 Victoria Cross recipients. William Hall, the first. In 1867, we had John Chipman Kerr from Fox River in 1916. Philip Bent, Halifax in 1917. James Robertson in 1917, and John Bernard Croke from Glace Bay in 1918. And 2 of those have legions, I believe, named after them. One being the Croke in with the school. Is that school? A Legion branch in Glace Bay.
And school.
And the school and Legion named after him, and as well as in Hantsport, where William Hall has been so widely recognized. There is the Lucknow branch Legion there today. And it's too bad in debate like this that we weren't able to bring in historians like Joey Patterson. I don't know if anyone here knows St. Clair, his appropriate name, but Joey's done a tremendous, tremendous amount of history on a variety of things, everything from shipbuilding, and of course, who couldn't tie shipbuilding and shipping and traveling on the high seas and not have William Hall come into that story. He would be an excellent resource to have here, and if you really wanted a history lesson, his book that has been written a year or so ago and published is a great lesson there as well. But we were very fortunate to have people like William Hall and others who I've just mentioned receive awards. But you know, this tradition has carried on over the years. They may not all be Victoria Cross bearers and recipients, but we have had a number of people from this province and from this country fight in many, many wars. And here we are at a time of remembrance in November that we always think about, I guess, the top of mind more than other times of year maybe for some. And I know members of this House have stood in their place this week and they've reflected by way of resolutions some of those people. And one of those members sitting across the way there, I know from Lunenburg West, passionately spoke yesterday, I believe, in a resolution regarding family. And I can tell you, that's what people remember, not just on November 11th. They remember those people. The family of William Hall would have remembered for many, many centuries, or many years, not centuries, decades, and then you forget. It seems like there's a time when all is lost, but it comes back around. And these recognitions of William Hall, like we're seeing again, now tomorrow there's an event here, which I think we've all been pretty much made aware of. There's going to be a name. His name will take the place of a connector road in the Hantsport area. I don't know if other members will be attending, but I'm sure they will, local members at least, from Kings County, and myself, I know that I'll be there in the morning to attend that ceremony once again. Again, a very fitting time of year, but a very fitting change for our area once again in Hantsport to reflect on William Hall's feats in life and his memory and all that was done. But back to the time of year. Here we are in the time of remembering. And we do remember. A lot of us remember. I think probably most of us remember all year long, especially if we've had family in the service. Now, I have myself had many family members. My brother's in the service right now, stationed at Greenwood. I have 2 brothers-in-law who are both military men. One has spent 2 terms in Afghanistan. You can just imagine what that must be like. He can think of that, and when you talk to him, he doesn't talk much about it. Like a lot of the old vets didn't talk much about their experiences when they were overseas in the First and Second World Wars and Korean conflicts. But those are always things that we think about and we don't forget because of our family connections to things like conflicts around the world. And every day that we hear in the news, we're still hearing about Afghanistan, we're hearing about terrorism, we're hearing about conflicts. It's hard not to remember, not just on November 11th. Well, we'll all go to the cenotaph and we'll stand and we'll do our thing. But it's every day. It's so in the forefront now with the news and the media. I wonder what it would have been like had all that been around in the day of William Hall. Would it have been as widely recognized? You could just picture in reading the history and the story that Jim told. Pardon me, the story that the member from Kings North told. He gave quite a history lesson on, you know, the big gun, and you can picture this sort of as you read it. So unlike today, when you see actually what is going on in these places, and there's a whole different picture of what war means today. There's a whole different picture of what our veterans are today. We have the new vets or modern vets who are fighting for rights. We have veterans from the Second World War, those that are still alive, and that number is shrinking. The Korean conflict, that number is shrinking. My wife's grandfather is a veteran of the Korean War. He's 85 years old, I think now, you know, and he's getting more frail by the day, by the week, by the month, as are a lot of those people that we hear talked about in this Legislative Assembly at this time of year when resolutions and so on are brought forward. And in different times, I suppose, too, when we talk about our legions and we're doing this or we're doing that. But it's important that we remember William Hall. It's important that we remember, It's important that we remember all of those recipients. It's important that we remember all of our veterans from days gone by, not just on November 11th. And when we see our kids in the schools, there are legions that go around, I know in my area, and they'll talk maybe about William Hall a little bit in these days through the Remembrance Week when they visit elementary schools and they do presentations and the kids sit there in their assembly watching intently as this last post is done, and all of that process is completed year after year after year, and they watch this all the way through. And if it wasn't for that, I don't know just exactly how this would be carried on, I guess through places like this and opportunities such as this coming forward tonight. But we have to continue to promote, not just in November, but all year long. We have to remember, again, as I said, our new vets that are fighting in conflicts around the world now. And we need to figure out where we're going with that. What does that actually mean? And people like William Hall, as we keep going back, it's the history lesson, it's the beginning, it's the first Victoria Cross that was awarded. Will there be more? Maybe. Will there be more from this province? We've already seen the sacrifice of Nova Scotians in current wars. What a shame that is that these young men and women are losing their lives, some will say. It's a huge debate, as we know, around the country. Should we be there? Shouldn't we be there? And again, here we are in the news. Now there's a potential for an extension. And I can tell you, for military families like ours, that means something. So let's remember William Hall and John Croke and James Robertson and Philip Bent and John Kerr, 5 Nova Scotians that received this very proud, great word, this great honor of the Victoria Cross. And let's remember all those who are still out there fighting for us today and every day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the honourable members tonight for an excellent debate on such a historic topic on African Nova Scotians. The adjournment for the House to rise was made earlier. We will now rise and sit between the hours of 12 noon and 4 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you.